foggy night, shadows creeping slow, whispers in the wind, where Johnny go? Blood on the hay, pitchfork gleam, midnight moon, a witness to a scream, barn doors creaking, secrets kept tight. Old man Joe seen a deadly sight, no justice found, just a broken plow, crows peck the ground, dead man's vow. Murder in the meadow, lies thick as dust, promises shattered, betrayed by trust, chaos in the cornfields.
I'm here with Country Diggers. Today we're going to go into a murder ballad blues song called Dupree'S Diamond Blues. And I'll be singing the version of the Grateful Dead's. And also I'll be reading from ZenDogMusic.com. All right, Dupree'S Diamond Blues by the Grateful Dead. When I was just a little young boy, Papa said, son, you'll never get far. I'll tell you the reason if you want to know. 'Cause a child of mine, there isn't really very far to go. Well, baby wants a gold diamond ring, wants it more than most any old thing. Well, when I get those Jelly Roll blues, why, I'd go and get anything in this world for you. Down to the jewelry store, packing a gun, says wrap it up, I think I'll take this one. $8,000 please, the jewelry man said. Dupree said, I'll pay this one off to you in lead. Well, you know, son, you just can't figure. First thing you know, you're gonna pull that trigger. And it's no wonder your reason goes bad. Jelly Roll will drive you stone mad. Judge said, son, this gonna cost you some time. Dupree said, Judge, you know that crossed my mind. Judge said, fact is, it's gonna cost you your life. Dupree said, Judge, you know that seems to me to be about right. Well, baby's gonna lose her sweet man. Dupree come out with a losing hand. Baby's gonna weep it up for a while, then go on out and find another sweet man. Gonna treat her with style. Judge said, son, I know your baby well, but that's a secret I can't never tell. Dupree said, Judge, well, it's understood, and you got to admit that sweet jelly, sweet jelly's so good. Well, you know, son, you just can't figure. First thing you know, you're gonna pull that trigger, and it's no wonder your reason goes bad. Jelly Roll will drive you stone mad. Same old story, and I know it's been told. Some like jelly, some like gold. Many a man's done a terrible thing just to get baby that shiny diamond ring. All right, that was the Grateful Dead. And now on to the story. This is Dupree'S Diamond Blues. It also goes by the name of Betty and Dupree, and a lot of singers sung it. Billy Lee Riley, Kingfish Bill Tomlin, Chuck Willis, Grateful Dead, Brownie McGee, Josh White, Georgia White, Robert McCoy, Washboard Willie, Big Joe Duskin. And in Our Singing Country, John and Alan Lomax, you can find it on page 228 to 330, and Odum Johnson, 1926, the Negro Workday songs at the University of North Carolina Social Studies series. There's 2 black versions of the song, and the most interesting aspects of this Dupree song is that it may be compared with the Atlanta ballad of the white Frank Dupree, as popularly sung on the phonograph records. Alton C. Morris gave 2 Florida texts of this ballad, and it shows that it was based on the case of Frank Dupree of Abbeville, South Carolina, who in a jewelry store robbery in Atlanta on December 15th, 1921, killed a policeman and was executed for the murder on September 1st, 1922. All right, now on to the story. Let's turn back the clock to December of 1921, the crime. Frank Dupree was not born bad. His mother died from Spanish influenza in 1918. He, his father, and brother moved to the Atlanta area in search of work. Frank obtained work at a film company, but was laid off. He described his situation as being half-starved, without anything to wear. His downfall began the day he met a distant uncle who provided him a hotel room that he could sleep in a bed. Frank accepted the offer, but over the course of the night, he stole $140 from his uncle and snuck away. When that money ran out, Frank robbed a jewelry store, not the one we sing about. He stole 2 rings. One he sold for $125 and the other for $300 to a local bootlegger. The bootlegger suggested to Frank that he could earn a living doing more jewelry store jobs. This sounded better than begging for odd jobs and handouts. With his newly found money, Frank bought a .32 caliber Colt hammerless pistol. Frank also bought new clothes and rented a room at the Child's Hotel in downtown Atlanta. There in the lobby, he saw a young woman playing the piano. He walked up next to her and said, "You sure do play fine." Her name was Betty Andrews. Betty was in 1920s terms a flapper. She told Frank that she was a dancer in the racy musical called Choo Chin Chow. Okay, the jelly roll term in the 1920s is slang for a woman's private parts, is what jelly roll means in 1920s slang. But this one, this was later proven to be a lie. What she was in the 1920s terms of flapper. She told Frank that she was a dancer in the racy musical called Choo Chin Chow. This was later proven to be a lie, but to Frank, Betty was a dream. During the week that they knew each other, before the infamous crime, they went on a few dates. As the song says, Betty told Frank that he needed to buy her nice things if he wanted to court her. Frank, paraphrasing, said, "Name your price." And Betty told him that she wanted a diamond ring. During the subsequent criminal investigation, the police tried to link Betty as a co-conspirator and contend that she took Frank to the jewelry store and picked out the ring she wanted him to steal. However, Frank denied this accusation all the way to the gallows. On the morning of December 15, 1921, Frank Dupree strengthened his nerves with whiskey and put on a gray overcoat, a newsboy cap in his right pocket. He hid his Colt hammerless pocket pistol. He walked into Kaiser Jewelry Store on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta, shown at the, you can see the picture I put up. Frank was nervous and told the clerk that he'd like to buy a diamond ring. The clerk showed Frank some inexpensive rings, but he told her he wanted to see the one in the window, a 3.25 carat, $2,500 ring. That would be $30,000 today. The clerk asked the boss to handle this one. The boss held the ring and showed it to Frank. Then Frank said, "I'll take it," grabbed it out of the owner's hands and darted for the door. Kaiser's, however, retained the Pinkerton security guard and detective agency to staff a plainclothes guard on premises. That day, 29-year-old Irby Walker was assigned to Kaiser's. He positioned himself by the door as Frank drew suspicion to himself. When Frank tried to run, Irby pushed him down to apprehend him. Frank then drew his pistol and shot Irby twice. Irby cried for medical help, but shortly died in the arms of a store clerk. Irby left behind his widow Gladys and their 7-year-old daughter. Frank ran down Peachtree Street. A bystander, Graham West, tried to stop the fleeing murderer. Frank shot him in the face. Frank ran back to the Child's Hotel and told Betty what he did. He then ran off to find the bootlegger to see if he could pawn the ring for some quick getaway cash. The bootlegger told Frank, "That sure took some guts, kid." But he knew the ring was too hot to sell in Atlanta. The bootlegger knew a pawn shop broker in Chattanooga who might be interested and set Frank up with a driver to take him there overnight for $90. The driver worked for a taxi company and swiped the keys to a Packard Twin 6. Frank was on his way out of town. Upon arrival in Chattanooga, the pawnbroker offered Frank $400 for the ring. That was all the cash he had on hand. To sweeten the deal, the pawnbroker gave Frank a ticket voucher that could be redeemed for another $200 if Frank decided he did not want to purchase the ring back. Frank gave the driver his $90 and headed to the train station to make his way to Norfolk, Virginia, a place he lived when he joined the military for a brief stint. Frank Dupree was now a fugitive. The manhunt. The getaway driver's employee reported to the Atlanta police that the Packard cab had been stolen. However, the employer called off the report when the driver returned in the morning with the Packard. The driver told his boss that he took a customer to Chattanooga. The police, however, were suspicious. A murderer had escaped downtown Atlanta, and taxi company advised that they took a passenger to Tennessee overnight. The driver cracked. He told the police everything. When the police searched the Packard, they found a .32 caliber Colt pistol stuffed behind the seat. It was not long before the police were at the pawn shop's doorstep in Tennessee. Did I mention Frank was not smart? Well, he wasn't. It is not comical, though, because as we see shortly, that his low intelligence resulted in his death sentence through a violation of his constitutional rights. However, whether love-struck or dumb, Frank sent a telegram to the getaway driver. The telegram included $40 wire for Betty Andrews and instructions for her to board a train for Norfolk. The police intercepted it and got a hold of Betty. A few days later, Frank wrote a letter to Betty, the substance of which discussed his crimes. Betty gave the letter to the police. The murder of Irby Walker and the Kaiser jewelry store robbery were front-page news in Atlanta. The press was very critical of the Atlanta police for just about everything, especially letting the murderer get away. The press called the murderer the Peach Street Bandit and published story after story bringing attention to the manhunt. Dupree caught on that the police had gotten to Betty and were now searching for him in Norfolk. He escaped to Detroit, perhaps because it was near Canada, is what it says in parentheses. When he got to Detroit, he searched out the Atlanta newspapers and saw that the press was all over his story. Empowered, Frank wrote a letter to the Atlanta press. This is not the first or last time a criminal on the loose taunted law enforcement. In 1777, Charles Bolton, aka Black Bart, wrote a poem to law enforcement after a stagecoach holdup. I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor, and for riches, but on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of bitches. Black Bart. Jack the Ripper also taunted the police. So did the Zodiac Killer and Son of Sam. Unfortunately for Dupree, his letter would also be fodder to support his death sentence. Dupree said, I would like to say that I think Atlanta has a bunch of boneheads for detectives. He also tried to exonerate the driver and the bootlegger. However, he did not apologize for killing Herbie Walker. Dupree signed his letter, the Peachtree Bandit. Clearly, Dupree was caught up in the buzz. Atlanta was also caught up in the buzz. The love story between Dupree and Betty gained attention. However, Betty's game was exposed. She was not an actress in the touring musical. She was just an unruly young girl who liked to drink, dance, and sleep around. The press hounded her. She denied any wrongdoing, denied that she loved Dupree, and denied asking for a diamond ring. Nonetheless, Betty Mania gripped the Atlanta tabloids. Back to the hunt for Dupree. Remember the $200 pawn voucher that the Chattanooga broker gave Dupree? Well, he tried to cash it in. He sent it to the pawn shop with instructions to wire the money to a location in Detroit. The broker informed the police. The police set up a sting, and Dupree was nabbed. In custody, Dupree confessed everything. He even asked the Detroit police if Georgia used the chair or the rope. It wasn't long before the Atlanta sheriff escorted Dupree back to Fulton County, where he would stand trial for the murder of Herbie Walker. The trial. The Atlanta district attorney announced he would seek the death penalty in the case of Frank Dupree. Given Dupree's multiple confessions, his attorney really had no viable defense. The defense lawyer's only hope was to beat a murder charge by proving that Dupree only resorted to deadly force because Herbie Walker used deadly force to stop him, which he did not. Dupree still talked to reporters. He asked for forgiveness and mercy because he was young, dumb, and drunk. Dupree made multiple public pleas for mercy, and it struck up a movement to save him. After all, Frank Dupree was a young white man in Georgia. Betty Andrews, caught up in the excitement, changed her tune and gave interviews professing her love for Dupree, and even said she would marry him if he beat the murder out. Under Georgia law as it existed in 1921, the crime of murder did not require premeditation. If found guilty, death was the penalty. However, this jury or the judge could grant mercy in this discretion. Georgia also had a law which prohibited an accused criminal from testifying under oath in their own trial. The theory being they would simply lie to save their neck. However, the law permitted a criminal defendant to speak to the jury. In this process, the defendant's lawyer was not permitted to ask questions or help guide his client. Likewise, the prosecution was not permitted to question the accused. Many years later, this law was declared unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. The High Court deemed it a violation of due process to permit uneducated people to speak directly to the jury without the assistance of counsel. This was Frank's only chance to tug at the heartstrings of the jury that was about to deliberate on his life. Frank's speech, as it is not considered testimony, was a prime example of why this law was unconstitutional. Frank's only hope was to heartfully apologize to Gladys Walker, who was present in the courtroom. He needed to ask for her forgiveness and that of her daughter. He needed to ask the jury for mercy and to express remorse for his crime. However, he did none of the above. Instead, Frank Dupree recounted the events of his crime and even seemed to brag a little. The jury's verdict was unanimous: guilty of murder and no mercy recommended. The judge addressed Dupree. "Let the defendant stand up. It is the order of this court that you be hanged by the neck until you are dead on the 10th of March, 1922, by the sheriff of Fulton County in the common jail between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. God have mercy on your soul." The movement to save Dupree ramped up. Preachers visited the jail, and petitions flooded the court and governor's office. Here is where Dupree's Diamond Blues crosses with another song, Ramble on Rose. Preacher Billy Sunday, just like Billy Sunday, wrote the governor and asked for mercy for Dupree. These preachers, I tell you, some of these big old preachers, the big fancy ones, have weird kind of names like, one of them, I'm not going to mention them. Nah. Anyway, Billy Sunday wrote the governor and asked mercy for Dupree. However, the efforts were to no avail. Dupree lost his appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court. The governor also denied Dupree's request to commute his sentence to life in prison. The governor explained that Dupree's crimes was horrible. Not only did he kill a man, but he shot a man in the face while trying to get away. Dupree bragged about his crime and taunted law enforcement, calling them boneheads. The governor said Dupree showed no remorse until he was caught. Lastly, the governor acknowledged the community outcry, the petitions, the preachers' pleas, but said that would all be best directed to support Gladys Walker and her orphan daughter. I agree with that. The execution. On September 1st, 1922, Frank Dupree was held at the Fulton County Jail. The gallows were constructed on the top of the building below the bell tower. A crowd had gathered outside the jail. Coincidentally, Betty Andrews was also being held in the jail for unrelated reasons. Betty's problems stemmed from being unruly and being placed in the custody of the state. Back then, the state could hold a young, unruly woman in detention for her own good. Get him a drink. The person who was at Frank Dupree's side during the trial, during appeals, and on the day of his death was his father, Frank Dupree Sr. Frank Sr. cried when the sentence was handed down. He knew Frank was not a monster, but just a child who did not deserve to be killed. Neither did that security guard. He brought Frank his last meal: ham, eggs, toast, potatoes, and coffee. Frank Jr. just picked at it. After prayers, Frank Sr. said, "I can't stand it," and hugged his son through the bars. He told Frank Jr. to be brave. He left in tears and turned and said, "I'll see you sometime." To get to the rooftop, Frank Dupree had to ride the jail's open-door elevator. In doing so, he passed by the floor where Betty Andrews was detained. The warden allowed Betty to stand in front of the elevator to see Frank, as he ascended to the roof. Frank in shackles gave Betty a wave and said, "I'll see you in heaven." Betty cried inconsolably. Frank Dupree was hanged at 1:50 p.m. on September 1st, 1922. Frank's father died 3 years later. They are buried together in a grave next to Frank's mother in Abbeville, South Carolina. The legacy. Having read the true story of Frank Dupree and Tom Hughes's book, Hangin, the Peachtree Bandit, I was a little bit concerned that Dupree's Diamond Blues was ruined. How could we, ZenDog, the site I'm reading from it, sing a song that glorified the events that resulted in the death of a young man, a husband and father, who was just doing his job to earn extra money during the Christmas season? However, Garcia and Hunter left ambiguities in the lyrics to soften the tragedy. We don't know if Dupree killed the jewelry man. All we know is that Dupree said, "I think I'll pay this one off to you in lead." Perhaps our Dupree just threatened the jewelry man. Consequently, our Dupree certainly does not kill Herbie Walker. Likewise, we don't really know if the judge sentenced our Dupree to death or life in prison. All we know is that the judge told Dupree, "Fact, it's going to cost you your life." The real story of Frank Dupree is tragic. The song Dupree's Diamond Blues, however, has evolved over the years into a jovial tale that is disconnected with the historical truth. Excuse me. If you read Hanging the Peachtree Bandit, you may agree with me that Frank Dupree should not have been hanged. I think he should have, because he did kill somebody in the middle of a jewelry store robbery. So that he shouldn't have did that. He shouldn't have been robbing the jewelry store to begin with. It don't matter if it's premeditated or not with this, but he did express remorse for his crimes over and over. I don't know if he did or not, because the historical account said he did. Although he failed to do it at the critical time as a result of an unconstitutional law. I agree with that. That was unconstitutional. The accused should have counsel to speak at their trial, to testify at their trial. In fact, Frank told reporters that he wanted to live so that he could dedicate every waking hour to help Gladys Walker and her daughter. In all the accounts of interviews, Frank Dupree never spoke with malice. Well, I don't know about that because I didn't read it right here. Where did they put it then? I just read that he wasn't remorseful. I don't know. Okay, he seemed aloof of the gravity of his situation, and all of his tics, the smiling in court, fidgeting, etc., seemed to be a product of an incredibly scared teenager. In fact, a court-ordered psychologist assessing his competency deemed him to be a high-grade idiot. I believe that. Frank never denied his crimes and accepted his punishment. Well, you know, Judge, that seems to sound about right. However, Frank's case was political. In fact, the Ku Klux Klan was involved in trying to persuade the governor not to hang a white man. Also, Frank shot and killed a law enforcement officer. The governor had a difficult decision. We can enjoy Dupree's Diamond Blues. Just remember the legacy is dedicated to Herbie Walker and his family. Okay, well, this is what Dupree as a folk legend began in 1925. when blind Andy Jenkins recorded The Fate of Frank Dupree. In 1931, Kingfish Bill Tomlin recorded Dupree Blues. In 1958, Chuck Willis recorded Betty and Dupree. ZenDog performed Dupree's Diamond Blues a bunch of times. None of the song's versions tells the story accurately, okay? But after all, that's folk music, yep. Okay, the epilogue. Betty Andrews was actually born Margaret Peggy Guest in 1903. As noted, she was an unruly child and her parents did not want her at home. Her unruliness landed her in jail, but not for having committed any crime. It was in one of those detentions that a reverend helped her to get on her feet. In 1932, Betty resumed using her real name and moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas. She married a military man named Maurice Balston. She had no children, but she and her husband raised a foster child. The Betty Andrews we sang about died with Frank Dupree in September of 1922. The real Margaret Balston died in 1972. I'm sure her past life as Betty haunted her all of her days. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed, and tell me what you think about it, and I'll see you later.